What if I told you the world's most famous MMA league was one step away from being banned forever? It was violent, it was brutal, and somehow, it was legal. No judges, no rounds, just 8 fighters, a cage called the Octagon, and a $50,000 prize for the last man standing. There was no rule book either, just Big John McCarthy trying to keep order. The opening fight of UFC 1 made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't a sport, it was a spectacle of violence. There were sumo wrestlers, kickboxers, guys fresh off bar fights, even a boxer with one glove.
The Brazilians always say, if you have a good clinch, you have good jiu-jitsu.
At first, it looked ridiculous. Then the bell rang. Blood poured. Bones broke. The crowd gasped. This was no gimmick. It was real. Raw combat with almost no restraint. But one man would change everything. Royce Gracie. In a night filled with giants and brawlers, this skinny Brazilian in a white gi looked wildly out of place. But he had a secret weapon. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. One by one, Royce dismantled men twice his size with calm precision. Just pure technique beating brute strength.
This is a major part of fighting. People do not understand that this is very strong.
Royce Gracie became a legend in one night, and the UFC became a hit. But fans and fighters alike had no idea that the madness was only just beginning. As pay-per-view buys grew, so did the brutality. The UFC didn't just allow violence, it celebrated it. Fighters battled through one-night gauntlets, sometimes fighting 3 times in a single evening. And the crowd loved every second. Forget mascots, the early UFC had the just bleed guy. This was the UFC at its most unforgiving. It was seen less as a sport and more as a fight for survival. While the blood and violence drew massive attention, it wasn't always the kind the UFC had hoped for, but we'll get to that soon. Amid the carnage, a chiseled catch wrestler with a chip on his shoulder named Ken Shamrock arose. After a 57-second loss to Royce Gracie at UFC 1, he became obsessed with redemption, racking up wins, and zeroing in on the man who humiliated him. The first super fight in UFC history took place at UFC 5 in 1995. Royce Gracie, the Jiu-Jitsu wizard, versus Ken Shamrock, the powerhouse seeking revenge. What followed was the longest fight in UFC history. Shamrock controlled from the top but couldn't finish, and both men collapsed in exhaustion as the bout ended in a draw. It wasn't the explosive finish fans expected, but it created something bigger.
The skill, the technique, the power, and the endurance of these two guys.
The UFC's first great rivalry. Gracie versus Shamrock wasn't just a fight, it was a clash of styles, of egos, and of visions for what this brutal new sport could become. While Gracie and Shamrock fought with skill, fans demanded blood. What came next was raw, unfiltered violence from fighters who treated the cage like a barroom brawl. If the early UFC proved that technique could conquer size, the next era showed that fans didn't always care. By UFC 6, the violence was no longer a side effect, it was the main attraction. Mismatches, mayhem, and pure aggression ruled the cage. This was the era of raw power, and no one embodied it better than David Tank Abbott, a 280-pound street brawler who looked like he had just left a biker bar. Tank didn't care about technique or belts. His style? Pit fighting. His training? Drinking beer and throwing punches in real fights. And it made him a star.
He may step in. Oh, that's it.
Tank Abbott wasn't just a fighter, he was a spectacle. Fans either loved him or hated him, but everyone wanted to see what he'd do next. For a sport desperate to survive, Tank was ratings gold. While Tank fed the bloodlust, another force was quietly dominating with an entirely different approach. Dan, the Beast Severn. Severn wasn't new to UFC fans. He had lost to Royce Gracie at UFC 4 in a legendary fight that lasted